So, Jacqueline Gordon, welcome. Tell me about my book, please. So, you've
Um,
read part of my book, Walking the Path.
I'm about halfway through,
Okay,
right?
cool.
And I like the way that it's laid out, right? I'm a big believer in telling stories as opposed to making statements.
Okay.
I'm a huge fan of Malcolm Gladwell, who is the leading social scientist of our time. And Malcolm Gladwell can deliver some pretty dry information, but because he does it through stories, um, it's relatable. I recently, as the teacher shortage continues to grow,
Mm. And that's another
who
story.
didn't, yeah, who didn't see that one coming? All the ostriches, right? Um, but his book, The Tipping Point, I mean, we're there, right? We're there on a variety of different issues, but certainly pertaining to the teacher shortage. So I like that telling stories. But the one thing that I disagreed with was, and I believe the sentence is, some people don't want to make an impact,
Okay.
right? And I would disagree with that um, based upon my experience. And I believe that people make an impact, many people make an impact and just don't really ever know about it, right? Because it wasn't a goal, it wasn't written down, it wasn't a part of their big life plan.
Mhm.
Um, but they make an impact. Um,
Well, do you recognize that that's not always somebody's agenda?
I will tell you, I recognize that there's a significant segment of our population that doesn't believe that they can make an impact.
And that's what I
They
want to
haven't,
change,
yeah. They haven't been empowered
to
to
think that
believe
way. Yeah.
they can make an impact. And I will say, um, I think it behooves all of us to recognize people when they do make an impact and they're unaware of it. I
That's gold, though.
LinkedIn,
That's really gold. Yes. To give
right?
them credit for something that they've done.
So my children went to a little elementary school that 325 kids, little neighborhood school, right? We Our house was 4 houses away from the school. So all my kids walked to school. Isn't that cool? And and of course everyone who lived around me, all my neighbors were retired. So the moment that they were out of my line of sight, all my neighbors took it upon themselves because they had nothing else to do. They were retired, to keep an eye on them. And if Al Acker didn't call me at least once a week to tell me something that those children had done, it just wasn't, the week wasn't complete, right? I'm like, they are children, Al. But in this little school, 60% of our population qualified for free and reduced breakfast and lunch. And but it was a magnet school. So we attracted a percentage of the population who both understood how important education was and were willing to roll up their sleeves to get it done, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, we had 110 ways for parents and community members to volunteer.
Is that a lot or
That's a
I don't?
lot.
Okay, just making sure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
110.
110, right? And we took into consideration working parents, right? Um, are there things that you can do that don't require that you be there? We also had a great partner. First Tennessee Bank gave every employee who had school-aged children 3 days off with pay to volunteer in their child's school,
3 days off an academic year.
an academic year.
Okay.
But we had one parent who had 4 children in that elementary school. That's 12 days.
Wow.
That's 2.5 weeks, right?
And they still got it.
And
They got the time
pardon
off.
me?
They got the time
Oh
off.
yeah. Oh
Okay.
yeah. Oh yeah. Oh
Yeah.
yeah. This parent was she was so excited about this opportunity. And we would give them a map, kind of a calendar at the beginning of the year. And she came up to me one day and she goes, "Oh, I'm so excited. I've already marked those things, those days that I want to be here." Right?
Cool.
Because there's certain things we didn't do a science fair in so much. That wasn't, I mean, we did a science fair, but our real focus was on geography. And so we would do this big geography fair.
Where
And
where in the world are you here? What state?
this is in Knoxville, Tennessee,
Okay. Okay.
right? And but so we had that percentage of the population. And then East Tennessee has no zoning laws, or that's just my belief, right? So the neighborhood I lived in, Holston Hills, at the end of the street was the country club and the golf course and the tennis courts and the swimming pools, right? Uh, my son caddied for Michael Jordan. That's how important that golf course is,
Wow. Okay.
right? I
Got
mean,
it.
you would see limos going down Chilhowie Drive because it was like one of the top 100 golf courses in the United States.
Wow.
So so you had that, but then you had that whole population. We really relied on census data, and 30% of the population in East Tennessee, where we were at, the adult population is functionally illiterate.
Hmm.
And we would see this when parents were enthusiastic volunteers until, this is really interesting, until their kid could read better than they could.
Hmm.
And then
Interesting.
they would disappear,
Wow.
right?
That's sad.
And schools believe that they're there to educate children. The holistic approach is we're there to educate everybody. That includes parents.
Hmm.
But uh, the parents from the well-to-do neighborhood were the hardest to get to volunteer.
Hmm.
There was one woman one day and she said, "Well, I'd really love to, but I have my tennis lesson that day."
Well, we know where priorities lie. That's exactly right.
Well, no kidding. So, but in all of this, there was one woman in particular. I will never forget her. Her name was Sharon Dean. And I know what poverty looks like. Poverty has bad teeth.
Okay. That's okay. I'm with you.
And and she drove this little rattle trap pickup truck that every time it started, I knew Jesus loved her best that day. In fact, I remember saying to our principal, I said, "We need to do a fundraiser to buy Sharon a new vehicle because it makes my heart skip a beat." Right.
Wow.
But Sharon Dean worked at a pilot travel center, and gas
Hmm.
station, big
Hmm.
on the highways, right?
Hmm.
And she would go to work at 10 o'clock at night and work until 6 in the morning. And she would leave her 2 elementary age children home alone because she just didn't have a lot of choices. So she would come home at 6 a.m. and get her kids up and get them fed and dressed. And 3 mornings a week, when she would bring her children to school, she would get out and come in and volunteer for 3 or 4 hours. And I said to her one day, I said, you just have to be exhausted. I mean, I did a lot of things in that school, and I got a lot of recognition. Um, I was a Tennessee Volunteer of the Year, which I just kind of brushed off and poo-pooed until our principal took me aside and said, we're the volunteer state. This is a big deal.
Make it a big deal, please.
Well, the obvious escapes me. But I said to Sharon, you must be exhausted. And she turned and sincerely looked at me and said, education is the only thing that will keep my children from repeating my fate.
Wow.
And that's an impact, not just for her children, but for all those other parents that fall into the Sharon Dean category, right? Who have little to no education, um, who believe that they're landlocked, so to speak, in life.
Mhm.
Cesar Millan uh, says that it takes a good dog to make another dog better. I'm a big believer in that it takes a good parent to make another parent better. So those parent education classes that the nice white people don't even come to, um, we did something different. Um, we called it craft night,
Wow.
right? And we had no experts. Um, we believe that all of our expertise sat around our tables, but we have some real crafty people. And so these women, it was specifically for women. We provided transportation if you needed it. We fed your kids. We had childcare available, whatever you needed for us to be there. And the first month we did it once a month, and the first month that we did it, um, I called 12 women and said, you need to be there because I know where you live.
That sounded like a threat.
And I mean that in the most loving Christian manner, right?
Absolutely.
That's an East Tennessee saying. So, but the second month, so what we were doing was we were not only talking about things they should do, and we covered everything from how to help your kid with homework to how to get them to bed at a decent time. Anybody who's taught, you know, I personally think that having your child, and that's anyone under the age of 18, in Walmart after 8 o'clock at night should be prosecuted for a felony.
Pretty tough there,
I
lady.
mean, the first time I went in Walmart, I see all these, it's like 10 o'clock at night, and I see little ones.
Hmm.
It was all I could do, Keith, not to take him by the shoulders and say, the Lord has spoken to me. There is nothing you need at Walmart more
At
important than
10
getting that
o'clock.
child to bed so their head wouldn't be laying like this in my math class the next day, right?
Nice.
Um, but we not only talked about those things and shared, but we were really building community. So by the fourth month that we did it, we had started in our library, which was a pretty good sized library for that size school. We had started in our library, and by the fourth month, we had tables out in the hallways all the way up to the office because people wanted to be a part of this community. They wanted that fellowship, and just by being there, those people made an impact, right? They showed that they cared. They showed that they wanted to be better and do better. We had one night, our theme was bedtime. So this woman looked at me and she goes, he's just not tired at bedtime. And I said, that's my youngest. I said, I would have his DNA tested for Count Dracula blood, but since my ex-husband thinks I slept with every man in the world, let's not go open that can of worms.
Yeah,
Right?
you didn't say that on my show.
Sure, I did. They'll love it. There's there's almost 12,000 people who follow me on LinkedIn, and I sincerely believe it's because they're just all wondering what I'm going to say next, right? Got to get people's attention, Keith.
I kind of do it one way and you do it a different way.
Sure. It all works, right? And I said, I finally, Carrie was like 6 years old, and on the weekends, I finally just taught that kid how to lock up the house because I was going to bed, right? He might be up until one or two, and he still is
Wow.
a night owl,
Wow.
right? I'm still, we were going to go and to this elaborate breakfast buffet, and I show up at 10 o'clock in the morning, and I'm like, get out of bed. We have reservations. Put something decent on.
Or at least just put something on. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But that led us to talking about having a routine, brush your teeth, read a book, say a prayer, kiss them on the head. I mean, I have four boys. Every night when I put them to bed and I kiss them on the forehead, I would say to them, I love you best, right? And this went on every one of them, you know,
Did they
and
all
it
sleep in
was
the same
years.
same room? Did they all sleep in the same room?
Oh
Oh, well
yeah,
then they
they're
all
all in
heard
the
that.
same room. Right. And it was years into this, and finally one of them said, "Mommy, you say that to every one of us," and
Yeah.
I'm like, there is something that I love best in each and every one of you, right? My oldest son is a musician. I love the fact that, his love of music is equal to mine. Um, my son Jordan, uh, Jordan has my first grandchild, uh, and but he married a woman who had a child from a previous relationship. And I one year made them all cookbooks with all the family recipes in them because I got tired of them calling me saying, "How do I make Grandma Maxine's ranch beans?" Right? So I made these little cookbooks. So Jordan calls me one day and he said, "Mom," he said, I was making the Hell's Kitchen chili that's in that cookbook you made for us." He said, in Camden, who had been raised almost exclusively by his grandparents. I mean, this kid was 7 years old and could not bathe himself,
Hmm.
right? He said, I was making that chili, and Camden came out and he said, "Is it going to be spicy?" And Jordan said, "Well, you can read that. What's it say? What do you think?" And he said, "Yeah, I think it's going to be spicy." And Jordan said, "Here's what I do know. I know that your baby sister is going to sit down and she's going to eat it, but I'm happy to go back in the kitchen and make grilled chili just for you."
Wow.
And this little boy is like, "Grilled chili?" I said, "Let me guess. He decided he would eat the chili you were making." Jordan said, "Absolutely." And I said, Jordan, I always thought people who beat their kids were simply folks that weren't smart enough to know how to mess with their heads.
Awesome.
So I love that about Jordan, right? My son Kelly is a reader. I was just telling someone the other day, became a snow skier because my mother had said, "Are you going to spend all weekend, every weekend in your room reading?" Like, so I thought just to get her off my back, I would join the ski club and I would go with them to the ski resort and I could sit in front of the fireplace and read all day long, right? So the first day we go out, I'm going for the lodge, and one of the guys in the ski club, it was me and five guys, and like the worst guidance counselor in the world. That's another story. But Tim Junk grabbed me. He said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Well, I'm just going to go in and read." He said, "No, no, 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 no. We all decided that every weekend, every week when we go skiing, one of us is going to stay with you to help you until you're a great skier." I'm like, well, that plan just went down the toilet, right?
So
And
now,
and
so now you're a professional.
right.
No? No?
I'm a good skier.
Okay.
Uh and and uh and I'm pretty jazzed over the fact I've not attempted snowboarding yet, but it's all heel toe, right? And I know how to turn and I know how to slow down. And but Mammoth, California, this season has gotten 60 feet of snow.
Wow. Real snow too.
Yeah, real
Yeah.
snow
Yeah.
too, right? And I was talking to someone recently, and I said, they said, when do you think that we could go skiing? And I said, 60 feet of snow, we can go skiing in July. Right. And um Carrie opens his mouth and he just sounds like me, right? He's always been, he's very quick, really quick mind. um Kelly and Carrie went to an inner city performing arts magnet school. They were the white kids, right? They did not, Knox County did not promote this. And one day I had gone to pick Carrie up from school after school, and there was a young man zoned for the area, and he had that whole droopy pant thing going on. And I just, no judgment, but I just think it looks uncomfortable, right? They're always grasping at their pants and pulling it up. And as a 5'10" woman, it's like, those pantyhose that don't fit quite right. And you'll have to take my word, there are few things worse in this universe, right? And so, I'm watching this and Carrie eventually comes out and I said, "Does he not own a belt? Does he not understand the principle behind a belt?" To which my son looked at me and goes, "Gentle, those are my people." So that impact thing is so important. And it's the little things. It's not that huge. Perhaps it's time for us to redefine and recognize impact,
True.
right? I think that um, one of the things that we did at that elementary school that really kind of jump started our volunteer efforts was that all of our teachers and were given custom thank you notes and business cards.
For
And
what? What do you mean?
well, when a parent or a community member came in and volunteered that first time, they sent a handwritten thank you note to that individual. And then uh, our other secret weapon was Mary Margaret Broach, who came every day and picked up that volunteer sign-in sheet. And she called every person that evening who had shown up and volunteered just to say thank you. And that those strokes, that recognition, we would see people who were hesitant at first. um I don't believe I ever said we have enough volunteers. I don't think those words ever came out of my mouth. um but we really look for ways people could be involved. Once a month we did a teachers luncheon, and the PTA paid for the entree, but everything else was furnished by our parents. And I mean, from flowers on the table to candles to how did I didn't know that Kroger's cookies qualified for home bake, but I'm open. Um, and once a month, and we made sure that every teacher had a full hour, right? So they could actually eat and pee, which is an anomaly in schools.
In peace
And
too.
we had a parent. There's another one, right? And we had a parent cover those classes, and they really had insight into what that teacher's life was like, if only for an hour,
Mhm.
right? So instead of there being an issue when they were called in for whatever reason, instead of saying my kid wouldn't do that, they would say, get him down here, I'll take care of this, right? So it goes back to that building of community.
Mhm.
But I had a parent one day and she said, Miss Gordon, I would love to participate because I know the teachers like it so much. I had one teacher tell me that she would never leave that school just because of the monthly luncheon. And I can say in the 8 years my boys were there, in terms of turnover, we had one teacher who went out on sabbatical and one teacher who relocated, and that was the sum total of our turnover
Wow.
in 8 years, right?
Then
But
the
she
true
said, I'd love to.
essence of community.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
She said, I would love, right, to participate, but I can barely keep my family fed. And and I said, you have a washer and dryer? And she said, I do. And I said, do you have an iron and an ironing board and know how to use it? The pre-qualifiers are so important, Keith. And she said, yes. And I said, see all those table linens? I'm paying to have them professionally laundered. If you could do that, that would be a huge contribution,
Wow.
right? And I actually went over to Sam's and bought, one of those giant boxes of Tide for her and spray starch. And if your iron breaks, call me. And whatever, right? But I believe that we have an obligation to show people how they can make an impact. And I think that sometimes is missing. Um, and I believe that, there's, whether education or elsewhere. I mean, when I recruited IT, I had a hiring manager who said, listen, don't go out and recruit some little bushy tail. I don't want somebody tap dancing on my desk for my job, right? He was happy where he was at. He just wanted someone who's going to sit and write code. So I know that there are those in individuals, that I was at a conference not too long ago. I presented at a conference in South Carolina, and went to one of the breakout sessions. And this principal said, why do you think we as leaders have such a difficult time delegating?
Interesting question.
And and somebody said, because they might do it wrong. And honestly, I had promised myself that I was just going to listen, but
Don't promise yourself things you can't live up to.
I would have had to have been sedated not to reply to this one. I mean, seriously sedated. And she said, well, because they might do it wrong. And I said, wrong or just not the way you do it, right? Uh, when the boys were little, I had, timeout should really be called what it honestly is. I need you to get somewhere so I don't beat you to death.
We can't legally do that.
You need to go somewhere mommy can't see you. But I had this little chair made, and on the back of it, I had carved, I'm not bad, I'm just learning. Right. And so I said, even if they do it wrong, right? Beyond what we wouldn't do. I said, mistakes are an opportunity to learn. I mean, Maya Angelou said, I did what I did until I learned better, and then I did better. Right. So, and schools and this zero tolerance policy. I have a candidate right now who's been the head of an alternative school for a number of years. The last 3 years, he hasn't had a single teacher leave an alternative school. That is, I mean, that is, takes my breath away. Um, but now that the district has imposed this zero tolerance policy, I mean, he's getting kids that, it's one strike and you're out. That's just ludicrous, especially with children whose prefrontal cortex is not fully formed. So I stood up and I said, years and years and years ago, Kelly and I were setting, my third son, we were setting the table and for dinner, and he paused. He was like 8 or 9, and he looked at me and goes, mommy, I think God wants us to make mistakes because when we make mistakes, we seem to learn the very best.
Hmm.
I said, when we don't give people the opportunity to be wrong without it being the end of the world, we don't give them a chance to grow. We don't give them a chance to get to where they can be to make that impact, to make that difference. And sometimes the difference is just in one other person. And sometimes it's a much larger impact. But if your motivation behind it is so you can pat yourself on the back, I see all these posts on LinkedIn about I just got my PhD and blah 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 blah, and
Well, you see things that I don't, because I don't see that at all. And
oh,
I got one.
right. Uh, so some woman had posted that she had been named superintendent of the year in California, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, not to rain on your parade.
Can't you just give somebody their sunshine for a day?
It is such a mistaken policy. It's almost without fail political, right? There are a few things that you can do in one felled swoop to discourage everybody else who's busting their hump. To single out one person, right? Uh, I'm in Tennessee now, and I heard this report that the Department of Education had designated Maryville School District as the #1 school district in the state of Tennessee. I thought, oh, oh, thank goodness they've learned how to educate white upper middle class kids, right? But all of those kids in urban areas, all of those kids in, pardon me,
Mhm.
in rural areas, and the similarities between urban students and rural students, there are more similarities than differences. Um, but all of those people, I mean, I had a principal from Alpena, Michigan, tell me that he has parents who have always worked in factories, right? Who actually discouraged their kids from graduating from high school. And and all of those people who worked so hard dragging those kids across the finish line, right? So that they can enter another race. I mean, big deal. Maryville Schools, best school district, rah rah, right? Um, it's such an antiquated policy. I mean, if it was a good idea, Keith, seriously, do you not think that Apple Computer would have Employee of the Year or Microsoft would have Employee of the Year? It's just it's just discouraging. It may encourage one person and discourage the other. But so anyway, superintendent of the year in the state of California. And I said, not to rain on your parade, but Beverly Hall was superintendent of the year for the United States. Beverly Hall was the superintendent of Atlanta Public School Districts that in a cheating scandal resulted in 17 people going to prison, 37 educators losing their teacher's license, so that they could score well on the test. Didn't she do great things, right? And eventually, when all of this came out, right, it was, she was superintendent of the year from cheating. I'm like, it means nothing. I mean, I did a post today that said, with all the pushing going on in education, against education, from what you can teach to the books you can teach it with, to what you can say, to what you can't say, right? It's time for educator. It's time for the public to push back. And and pushback means enough with standardized testing, right? We spend in the United States $1.7 billion a year on standardized testing.
And the result of that is?
So Teddy Roosevelt said comparison defeats joy, right? So we have kids that we test and then we compare them to other kids. Nationwide, school districts are losing, K-12 public school districts are losing enrollment at a breathtaking rate, right? Because it isn't about it's all about regurgitating what someone else said. And I'll give you a great example. A number of years back, I had a Chinese student work as an intern for me. And one Friday afternoon, I said, "What do you read for pleasure?" And he looked at me like I was green with the poppers on my head. What? And he said, "For pleasure," he said, You don't understand. We hate books because all we do is study for the test, study for the test, study for the test, right? It's all about that degree. It's all about their final, like their final test that they take determines what university they'll go to, what field of major they can study,
Hmm.
right? And reading for pleasure allows us to be imaginative, right? There are very few, if we wonder why China comes in um, and does intellectual espionage, it's because all they can do is they have no imagination, they have no creativity. So when all of this goes into standardized testing, right? Are we not robbing our country and our kids of the ability to be imaginative and creative? Who cares? I had an interesting conversation with the American Montessori Society yesterday. Um, and I was telling them uh, when Carrie was in third grade, his teacher recommended he repeat third grade. And I'd seen him struggle. I knew I trusted his teacher, Vicky Violet. I got it, right? But you hear all of these stories about, oh, they'll be scarred, right? So we went that afternoon when the boys came home from school. Carrie and I are out on the front porch on the porch swing. And I said, you know, Carrie, there's this really smart woman by the name of Maria Montessori who says just as every child learns to walk and talk at different times, so too do they learn to read and write. To which my baby Carrie looked at me and goes, Mommy, are you trying to tell me that I'm going to repeat third grade? I'm like, I am. I am. He goes, fabulous. Can I go bounce on the trampoline now? So the standardized testing doesn't take into account that every child learns at the rate that they're prepared for. My fifth son, I adopted 10 years ago. He was the sole survivor of the genocide in Rwanda. And he he'd really never known a mama. He can tell you of running to the jungle while the Tutsis hacked his parents to death with machetes, right? So Justin, and nobody does guilt. He's currently in Warsaw, Poland. He had just gotten his MBA, and he's working with World Help, settling Ukrainian refugees. He said, you know, nobody knows what being a refugee is like more than you, right? So, but he, you know, he sent me a text and said, I need to talk to you. I need to talk to you, right? I'm like, okay, we're good with that. So he said, I should have told you that other people have been giving me money. And, you know, I paid for school and a stove and gas and a new bicycle and I said, well, they should be giving you money. He's fluent in 3 languages. And so when those mission groups would come over, he would act as the translator. They should pay him for that, right? And he said, yeah, he said, yeah, I know. And I had been on World Help to pay for some additional things. And he said, Mama, he said, don't make people mad at you, right? Because of me. And I said, listen, I don't feel like I'm serving the Lord unless I'm pissing someone off for Jesus. But in but in that I should have told you, right? I said, Justin, you're 20 years old. I said, do you know what the prefrontal cortex of your brain does? He goes, no. I said, has to do with decision making. And in young males, it's not fully formed until you're 22, 24, 26. I said, that makes you're 20 years old. That makes you a noodle head. I don't encourage you to tell me everything, but I'm not shocked when you do.